we dive right in. So whenever you're ready, we'll get in.
I was born ready, brother. Let's rock and roll.
I, I love it. Where are you located, man?
I'm in Jupiter, Florida.
Oh, cool, man.
So South Florida. Yeah, it's beautiful here. Love it.
Yeah, yeah, Florida. I'm landlocked here in Kansas City, so whenever I get by an ocean, it's just like it's a whole other world.
Yeah, it's nice. So, the one thing you do miss about being, I'll say, anywhere else is like the mountains, the scenery, roads that actually have like turns on them.
Yeah.
That's not a thing, right? So you got the beach, you've got the perfect, like it's perfect outside right now. It's pretty much like that all the time. So you get all that, but then you do sort of miss a little bit of that natural beauty, right?
Yeah. I love the fact that you're named after a planet though. What a great combination of words. I love it.
Yeah, Jupiter's a beautiful place, man. Very cool place. A lot of great people live here. Jordan's here, Tiger's here. There's all kinds of people here.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's get into what we've been living through the last 3 years with COVID. How did you survive that time period? I know Florida was a little different from the rest of the country. How did you get through it, and how has it changed the way that you do things now?
Well, so first of all, I entered federal prison during COVID.
Wow.
So I was living in Philadelphia at the time, and as everybody knows, all the major cities were being like rioted and burned to the ground. And so we ended up like right before I had to self surrender. I My wife and I just like walked out of our lease. We had a beautiful high rise apartment in downtown Philadelphia, and it was so dangerous. All the ground level windows and stores were all smashed in. There were people looting in broad daylight. It was straight up war zone. And National Guard was there. I would go out for a run during the day, and you'd have the skeletons of burned out police cars in the middle of the city. I mean, it was like straight out of a movie, right? It was like an apocalypse now type environment. So we ended up just walking out of our lease and moved in with my wife's sister out in like the countryside just to get out of the city. That's how bad it was. That's how scary it was. And knowing I was about to self surrender, I didn't want my wife there while I was gone. It was just too dangerous. Like it was total chaos. So we end up crashing with my sister in law before I self surrender for a few weeks. And then I walked into federal prison July 21st, 2020. So we're like mid pandemic at that point, right? It's still early that nobody really knew what was going on. It was still very scary. The government was, clamping down both at the federal level and at the state level. And when I walked in, I knew that there was a chance that I would have to quarantine because that was the buzzword of the time, quarantine. But I didn't know for how long. Now I'm a guy who's never been in any kind of trouble. I've never been in handcuffs. I have self surrendered, right? So I've never had any sort of interaction with law enforcement. And so I walked up to a federal correctional facility, razor wire fence, the whole thing, go through processing, and they tell me, look, you're going to have to do a stint in quarantine. How long? Well, maybe a couple days. Okay, fine, I can do that. And then I go to another guy, and he says, you're going to have to do a stint in quarantine. And I ask the same question. How long? Well, maybe a few weeks, maybe a month. We don't really know. So now I know that I've got some period of time between a few days and a month that I'm going to end up in quarantine. But the second part of that is, what does quarantine look like? Well, I found out that quarantine is the same as solitary confinement.
Wow.
So during that period of time, they were putting people in essentially the same place that they would put you if you shanked someone or if there was a disciplinary infraction. And so somebody straight off the street, never been in any kind of trouble, I was placed into solitary confinement for 22 straight days.
Wow.
So that was how COVID impacted me personally. It also had broader implications on my time in prison, which was quite short, but it was very limited. There were periods of time where we would not go outside for a month or two in the beginning. Then it started to ease up as time went on. But it was challenging, and in that moment, I was faced with the choice. Right, I was faced with this is gonna break me, or I'm going to choose the only option that I have left, and that is strength. And that's what I did. I started building consistent daily habits of discipline. I would get up early before the sun came up. I would exercise. the connection between the body and the mind is incredible, right? And what exercise can do when you're in those dark moments. You're living in a room that's basically the size of like your bathroom at home, right? Just imagine living in your bathroom, people sliding food under the door. That's what you're living in. And so you have no other choice but to break it down to the core principles. And so those principles for me were fitness, were focusing very hard on my mind at a little tiny window. And every morning I would watch the sun come up or what I could see of the sun coming up and just really try to focus on appreciating the little things that I had in those moments. Not the fact that there was no air conditioning in the middle of summer, right? Like
Yeah.
all the little things, like the fact that I could see outside, the fact that I had this really nice I had a really nice view of this beautiful bloomed tree. I would think about my wife, right? I would invest in kind of reading as much as I could, fitness, and then I just built that discipline over time, and that got me through this whole experience. And when I was released 10 and a half months later, I was still released into a COVID environment so the federal government is often slow to do things, as we all know. And so what happened is after federal prison, you are released to a halfway house. Now, the halfway house is way worse. You'd rather be in federal prison because there's a certain etiquette in prison. It's generally pretty clean because of the etiquette and the rules. Now, in a halfway house, it's completely different. And you have people from all security levels. Some people don't care if they go back to prison at all. And you're living in the same room with these people. So if they bring any sort of contraband, drugs, their behavior is out of line, it could have a ripple effect on the broader community. So the moment I walked into that halfway house, I was like, man, when can we have visits? When can I go home to see my wife? Oh, we were locked down because of COVID.
Wow.
So I spent about a month and a half there just walking around. It's essentially like a big fenced in property. You can go in and out as you please, but I just spent about a month and a half there just walking around that property, just preparing myself, again, exercising, focusing on reading, writing every day like I have for the past few years, and just building myself up into the person that I knew I had to become if I was going to overcome this challenge. So for me, it was a perfect storm of issues that all happened in my life. But if you ask me today, like this experience was the greatest thing that ever happened to me because it forced me to create the man that I am today. It forced me to find that better version of myself.
So
So long way of answering your question. I apologize for that,
no,
but
that brings so many levels of context. I'm so glad you did elaborate on that timeline. So now we're in 2023, coming out of this pandemic. Let's say I put you in front of a bunch of third graders at a career day. One of the kids looks up and says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
I help high achievers overcome adversity. That's
So,
what I do. I help people overcome challenges, particularly people who have had great success in life, who are now facing struggles, just like we all do. We all
yeah.
face challenge in life. And I help guide people through that using the formula that I've used to turn myself into we'll call it the 10.0 version of me.
So all of this time that you spent surviving, did that
Yeah,
give you the mental fortitude to get to this point to want to help others?
that's a fact. So I'll back up a little bit. Before I went through all of this, I was a highly successful young man. I started out in private equity in my 20s. I started building businesses. I had my first exit. I sold a company for $67 million at 29. I went on and built something like $40 million in real estate by 31, several other transactions. So I built $100 million of enterprise value if you add it all up by the time I was 31 years old. And then in a moment, my whole identity crumbled. I viewed myself as an ethical, transparent, law abiding, productive, positive member of society, and then also a wealthy individual, an intelligent individual, capable person. All of those things crumbled when I found out that I was going to be indicted. Right? I lost my complete sense of identity. And so that total destruction either it consumes you and people literally kill themselves over these situations, or you have a choice to turn that energy. There's energy in everything, right? All our thoughts are energy. Our conscience is connected to the universe, I believe, and that energy comes from somewhere. It's up to us to decide where we focus that energy. And at that point, I did. I fell apart. right? I was a high achieving young man doing many, many things. I ended up having to resign from all of the projects I was working on. And so I was a fast moving guy, all of a sudden sitting on his couch wondering what the hell's going to happen with my life at 31 years old, thinking my life is over. And so I sulked for weeks. And at one point, I just decided, you know what? Like, I owe it to my wife, who we just gotten married. I owe it to my wife to try to do something with this situation. I owe it to myself. I owe it to the character of who I thought I was. And so I decided that I was no longer going to say I'm a good person. I was no longer going to say I'm capable. I was going to go out and prove it. And so what I did was I started the only place I knew, which was to try to help others. And I made that commitment to myself. I said, I'm going to take this most horrible event of my life, this thing that has essentially all but destroyed me, and I'm going to find a way. And I don't know the answer yet, but I'm going to find a way to turn this into an event that lifts up others around me. And I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I just committed to this broader vision. And so I actually wrote a book. It's called Looking Forward, the Never Quit Mentality, and a little self-directed course that went along with it. And it was an interesting opportunity for me creatively because I was going through struggle. So I hadn't yet found the answer. I was finding my way through the problem. This was all before I surrendered. And what I did with that material is I licensed it to a wonderful organization that creates, they create educational materials for people who are incarcerated. And I gave them the material that I created, and they disseminated that material as a part of their coursework to facilities around the country. And so before I ever surrendered, I was already trying to do things to make a positive impact. I did a couple of speaking engagements, spoke at some universities, those types of things. And then I continued that work after my stint in quarantine when I went into general population in the community. I taught entrepreneurship courses. I taught financial literacy. I taught resume writing. I taught guys how to build release plans. I taught grown men how to read, which is an interesting thing when you're sitting down with a 45-year-old guy who can't read through third grade reading level, right? Like it's amazing, and it changes your perspective on life. And so I realized something inside of me through this process that I didn't know existed, and that was that I love to serve other people. I love to teach, and I love to help. And I'd always been so focused on myself up until that point, and becoming that, that private equity golden boy, right? The billionaire at 35 or whatever my dreams were, to being somebody who just focused on trying to serve other people. And so that's what I mean when this was like the best thing that's ever happened to me, because
Yeah.
it forced me to create a better man. And so I still do all that work today. I'm an entrepreneurship coach for a group called Inmates to Entrepreneurs. And then I have I'll call it like an elite life, business, and mindset coaching program where I work with, like I said, high level individuals who are facing struggle.
So it just plays testament to the fact that you have quite a backbone and quite a strength that you coming into this. How did all that happen in your childhood? How did these seeds become who you are today?
So it's interesting. So because I'm one of two siblings, and I am not trying to dog my sibling here, but my sister is somebody who's struggled deeply with substance abuse her whole life. It's the reason that I got into the industry, frankly. I've seen what it has done to my family. Lacks discipline, lacks the work ethic, lacks all of the things that we all know build a successful and good life. Yet I have all of these things. And so the question is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it built over time with discipline and habits? I'm sure it's a combination of all of them, right? But I did grow up in a home where my father was a very, very hardworking guy. He started when he was about 18 years old. He didn't do great in school, but he was always a very talented builder from the time he was a teenager. And so he started banging nails at 18 years old and built a company that, ultimately has done a lot of great work over the past 35 years, real estate development, projects, construction, custom homes, all that kind of stuff. And so I grew up around that. I also have other entrepreneurs in my family. So my grandparents owned restaurants. My aunt owns high-end clothing stores. So I had some good mentors, right?
Yeah.
And I always told them, I said, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to build big companies because I don't understand why you guys keep running these small companies. Why don't you go out? Why don't you go out and you buy another business or franchise or do this? And they'd be like, Brandon, you're like 13. Like, what do you know? Right. And so I said, I'm going to prove you wrong. And so I always had that chip on my shoulder,
Mhm.
right? That I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to show the world what I can do. And, unfortunately, I think part of that energy caused me to be blinded in certain areas of my life. I was very young. So I was invited into this partnership at the age of 26 by guys who were older than me that I looked up to. And yeah, I ate up everything they said. Right. And I think some of that insecurity, some of that lack of confidence in myself, some of that imposter syndrome, I hadn't matured out of that yet. I hadn't built enough character to be able to overcome that and to make decisions that ultimately changed the fate of my life, right? And I didn't have the strength to do it. And so when I work with the younger high achiever now, I focus on really helping them build that up so that they're a confident person when they walk in the room, right? They're not dealing with that imposter syndrome. So, growing up, I always had those ethics instilled in me, and I think at some point I was too focused on the prize. I was too focused on the world's perception of me and trying to prove that I was something greater. And I lost sight of really why I was supposed to be doing all of that.
So who's been a hero for you in your life?
My father, absolutely. My wife, frankly, my wife, has stuck by me through this whole thing, and I think that it's a statement of the importance of a strong marriage and a strong partnership. And so I I'm confident that I would have overcome this eventually, but had I not had the support of my wife throughout this whole situation, it would have been a longer road. There's no question. And I talk to people all the time who've gone through a similar experience who were not as fortunate as I was. But
So,
I worked very hard to nurture that relationship too.
I mean, it has to be a strong relationship. I mean, if you got married before this happened and now you're out of it, I mean, you have to have a bond that's pretty unshakable.
It is, but that's done. That's created, I believe,
Right.
right? And so from the entire time that this whole thing began, I was totally transparent. From the start, I said, look, this is what's happening. Here's what I know. I invited her to every single meeting with the lawyers. She saw the same evidence I did. She saw all the things I did. I admitted exactly what I knew, what I believed that I did wrong, and what I believed I did right. Right. So she saw the whole story. And I think part of that was really why we were able to overcome it. And while I was gone, I didn't see her for almost 11 months.
Wow.
And so that was another really challenging circumstance, was the opportunity to communicate in different ways. So I wrote her a letter every single day, right? And I did that because I wanted to over communicate with her because we weren't able to see each other. And that's very, very difficult. But it actually opened up a new level of, I'll call it romance, right? Because you're now expressing yourself in a way that we had never really expressed ourselves. We were never writing letters to each other, right? There's something very intimate about a handwritten letter. And so that's why I share these details, because in all of our challenges and our struggles, there are often hidden opportunities for us to grow and for us to change. And so I think, to your point, I think that relationship was certainly strong from the start, but the result that we got was created, and it's possible for others to do the same.
So in this modern day right now, every day you wake up, you have motivations that are in you. What is the ultimate motivator for you to get through your day and to say that day worked for me?
I want to help a million people overcome adversity in their life and transform their greatest challenge into their greatest defining moment. That is my mission. That's why I wake up every day and do what I do. And all of my clients know this. I'm obsessed, right? This is my life's work. I've committed myself to a vision that is bigger than me. And I think when I made that switch in my life from being very focused on my credentials, building my resume, to helping others build their life, that was like the biggest mental shift I've ever made in my life.
So, I always I keep thinking about that narrative of Mandela when he went to jail. And
Yeah.
he didn't think he was going to live because I believe his accomplice, I think he got executed, I believe. But the fact that he was in there for 27 years and when he came out, the world changed because of what he did. That
Mhm.
kind of thing. And when you talk about what you went through, you could have easily fallen right back into old habits,
Correct.
but there was something in you that said, I need to do this for humanity. And that's highly admirable. That's a great story.
Yeah, but the thing was is that that idea was always in me, and I believed that of myself. But what I learned through reflection and through this destruction of my character that I had to rebuild, I learned that I was incongruent. I was not walking in alignment with the person that I thought I was.
Yeah.
I lacked discipline. I lacked confidence. I struggled with alcohol. I would self medicate regularly with alcohol daily. I had anxiety, depression issues. I was afraid of conflict. I was a people pleaser. I was all of these things, yet on the veneer on the surface was of a very successful, very talented young man. But below that, my character was incomplete. And so when all of this happened, I had the opportunity to build the character that I knew I had to be. And that's the point of everything I do, is to help people build that foundation, to build that character that you must become if you're going to be the ultimate version of yourself, to be that great leader to your family, to your team, if you're building a company, to those that admire you, and to make a positive impact on the world. And so I got in the best shape of my life. I wrote a book. I am now writing a second book. I quit. I haven't drank a sip of alcohol since I walked into federal prison. I now am committed deeply to meaning and purpose, right? So I am now, every single day, I wake up and I walk that walk. I'm not just talking it anymore. And that's the difference. It's a subtle difference, because I think we lie to ourselves and convince ourselves that we are something that we're not. But the results speak for themselves,
Yeah, for
right?
sure. Yeah, they do. Absolutely. Let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into the 20-year-old version of yourself, and you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on the wisdom you've gained in your life up to this point. What would you tell that young version of you?
I would say nobody's going to hand you anything. I had a certain level of entitlement, I think, in my earlier years. And so that would be number one. And number two would be, don't be afraid to dive into the things that scare you the most. All of the great things that we want in life are on the other side of fear. And for me, as a young man, you said 20, and that was a like a marker age for me, because I really deeply struggled with my identity at that point in my life. And I went through a very deep bout of depression, and it was just, it was, I think, somewhat normal, but I was struggling with that sense of meaning and purpose. I'm a born entrepreneur, and I was afraid of taking that leap. I went to college, I did all that, but I was meant to be out in the world making a positive impact on people. And so if I could go back, and I say this to my wife all the time, I would have just gone straight into making a positive impact on others, and I think would have been a happier, probably more productive person for it. But it is
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah,
You
absolutely. Yeah. So everyone out there has a perception of you.
Mhm.
Family, friends, clients, colleagues, readers of your book, but you ultimately lead all of this. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are today?
I am a consistent, disciplined, focused individual who lives deeply to serve other people. That is who I am. I am that person every single day. I live a very disciplined, very structured life. I wake up at the same time. My schedule is exactly the same, and my goals are the same every single day. And I think that's a challenge for some people, because they view that as a boring life. I view it as a free life.
So you're giving people the opportunity to have a success story like you have. What's
Correct.
been one of the best client success stories that you've been a part of?
Yeah, so we have a young guy right now who is 22 years old. He was 22 when he signed with us. He's now 23. A young man, reminded me very much of myself. Very insecure, very lacked the confidence. Was kind of scrawny, undisciplined, staying up for multiple days on end. And I've worked with him now for, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 months at least, and he's now a completely different human being. He's a super talented entrepreneur, and this is why I wanted to work with him, because he's got all the raw materials, but he needed that guidance and that mentor and somebody to help him structure his life in such a way that he was consistently every day, like I keep saying, walking the walk, right? And when we started, he was all over the place, multiple ventures, none of them really successful. Now he's running a highly successful venture that's probably going to lead him to an 8-figure exit by the time he's 25 years old, right? And he's doing it with a certain sense of confidence that he never had, a confidence in his own ability. And so that transformation has been probably our best one so far. But I've got another entrepreneur, a female entrepreneur, who went through a divorce. Her husband just up and left one day. And she was a stay-at-home wife, loved that role, and was forced to become an entrepreneur. And she ended up becoming a fantastic entrepreneur, but struggled again with making that mindset shift of, oh, well, I'm a stay-at-home mom, I'm not an entrepreneur. And so over the past 8 months, we've been working with her to transform her into that person. And she's like, she's a savage. Like, she's a total leader now, and she's like a rock star, and also probably going to be on her way to 8 figures at some point pretty soon. So those are my 2 favorite stories at the moment.
You ever think you wish you would have had someone like you early on in your life to do that?
1,000%.
Yeah.
I had at an early age, and this is not a knock on my father or my family, but I had consumed all they knew about business and life. They all ran small businesses, blue collar people, and there's nothing bad about that. But I had consumed everything that they knew by the time I was like 16 or 17, and I was like, okay, I'm ready for the next level. And I struggled in my life to find that next level until I got into private equity at about 24, where I worked under a mentor who now runs, multi-billion-dollar private equity fund. But he really showed me, the way to, build businesses and to be a strong person. And unfortunately, my life kind of well, maybe not unfortunately, but my life did get derailed. But ultimately, that just made me a better person in the end. So I don't regret any of that.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to get your book, hire you, learn anything more about your story, where can they go?
So I direct everybody to my Instagram. I put out all kinds of wild content. And so that is at White Collar Savage. And you can DM me. I respond to literally everyone always. So please just reach out to me there.
So I have the same last name, kind of last name with a lot of vowels. What's the proper way to say it?
It's Coluccio.
Ah, I love it. I love
Yeah,
it. Very, very good old country. I love it. Cool.
that's a fact. Exactly.
Right on. Brandon, man, you got a great story, man. You're a titan. Thank you for opening up the storybook, and best of luck with everything, man. This is great. You're a great cat. I appreciate it.
So awesome. Thank you so much. I'm super grateful for the chance, man. Thank you.
Me too, man. Take care. Cheers.
All right, brother. See ya.
Take care. Bye bye.